Welcome to Order Militaris Radio TV. We here are lifelong Catholics, and what we do here is all for free, in love of Jesus Christ, the Most Holy Trinity, His Holy Church, and we will defend our Holy Mother, the Church. Our work is the true sense of apostolate. Any funds raised goes back into this work for equipment. This helps us give you an unbiased, hard-hitting truth that is not controlled by political correctness or interest groups. Today's topic is Wall Street and the rise of Hitler. And we welcome Brother Alexis Bonomo to the show.
Thank you, AJ, for having me on Order Militaris Radio TV. It's always a pleasure to be part of a true Catholic apostolate that's not done for personal enrichment. And so we have the ability, the freedom to think about things and research things that others won't because they're worried about their pocketbook. And one of the big things we in the United States, we Catholics need to do is start looking at how things are happening, what's really causing the events we see daily, not just regurgitating the hypnotic propaganda you're getting 24/7 on TV, Twitter, social media, Facebook, from now all the leading Catholics in the United States. They're all hypnotized, they're all pushing the same propaganda. You need to understand what is going on in the United States. Most Catholics know that we have a Masonic form of government, but they don't understand what the implications of that mean and how deeply controlled it's been a long time, and how the forces that control the country are very much in favor of civil war because they're all about control and destruction. They aren't loyal to our country. They're enemies of Christ. They don't give a bleep about you. And you have to stop giving them your loyalty and give Christ back all your loyalty. So we've already talked briefly about the associations between Wall Street and the rise of Hitler, but now we're going to do a deep dive into the details, and it's going to blow your mind how absolutely corrupt the US government has been for more than a century, and how the problem is not Moscow or Peking, the problem is New York City. Okay, so where does the story begin, AJ? Oh, and first of all, what's the book we're reading from?
Okay. Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler by Anthony C. Sutton. This is the 2002 published edition. And on the show page, there's a link for this edition. You can buy off of Amazon pretty cheap, or you can get the 1976 version for a free download. Pretty much the same book, but
the 2002 edition, AJ.
Yeah. What?
Yeah, how much did it cost if you want to buy the 2002 edition?
Let's see.
We'll let you know because since we'll be following the first chapter of this book quite closely, we want to do the honor to the publisher. This is a book you should really buy. I highly recommend it. I'm completely blown away about the amount of information is in it. And this is the book that should be studied in American civics on the history of the Second World War. This is the book that all your children need to read who are in high school, so they understand what is really going on in America and who they should really be voting for.
Yeah, so it's $14.25.
Yeah, and you ordered a copy and you got it in just a few days.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's pretty quick. Even way out there in rural Kansas, you can get it in a few days. Yeah. So where does the story begin? Anthony Sutton is going to, excellent researcher, he's going to tell us the narrative, and we're going to add some important points that he doesn't bring to light because we've discovered some things he didn't know in '76.
Yeah. So you're going to hear a lot about two types of plans. the Dawes Plan and the Young Plan. Now, let's set the stage for the Dawes Plan. The Dawes Plan, adopted in August 1924, fitted perfectly into the plans of the German General Staff's military economists. Testimony before United States Senate Committee on Military Affairs, 1946. The post-World War II Kilgore Committee of the United States Senate heard detailed evidence from government officials to the effect that when the Nazis came to power in 1933, they found that long strides had been made since 1918 in preparing Germany for war from an economic and industrial point of view. This buildup for European war both before and after 1933 was in great part due to a Wall Street financial assistance in the 1920s to create the German cartel system and to technical assistance from well-known American firms, which will be identified later to build the German Wehrmacht. Whereas this financial and technical assistance is referred to as accidental or due to the short-sightedness of American businessmen, the evidence presented below strongly suggests some degree of premeditation on the part of these American financiers. Similar and unacceptable pleas of accident were made on behalf of American financiers and industrialists in the parallel example of building the military power of the Soviet Union from 1917 onward. Yet these American capitalists were willing to finance and subsidize the Soviet Union while the Vietnam War was underway, knowing that the Soviets were supplying the other side. The contribution made by American capitalism to German war preparation before 1940 can only be described as phenomenal. It was certainly crucial to German military capabilities. For instance, in 1934, Germany produced domestically only 300,000 tons of natural petroleum products, less than 800,000 tons of synthetic gasoline. The balance was imported. Yet 10 years later in World War II, after transfer of the Standard Oil of New Jersey, hydrogenation patents and technology to IG Farben used to produce synthetic gasoline from coal. Germany produced about 6.5 million tons of oil, of which 85% or 5.5 million tons was synthetic oil using the Standard Oil hydrogenation process. Moreover, the control of synthetic oil output in Germany was held by the IG Farben subsidiary, Braunkohle-Benzine AG. And this Farben cartel itself was created in 1926 with the Wall Street financial assistance.
This will not be just the only thing in the Wall Street thing and the Wall Street assistance and accidental. Well, you know, if you think bankers accidentally loan money, that you must have been born yesterday because that's the last thing they do. They spend a lot of thought on it.
Mm-hmm.
It's always premeditated. Continue, AJ.
On the other hand, the general impression left with the reader by modern historians is that this American technical assistance was accidental, and that American industrialists were innocent of wrongdoing. For example, the Kilgore Committee stated, the United States accidentally played an important role in the technical arming of Germany. Although the German military planners had ordered and persuaded manufacturing corporations to install modern equipment for mass production, neither the military economists nor the corporations seem to have realized to the full extent what that meant. Their eyes were opened when two of the chief American automobile companies built plants in Germany in order to sell in the European market, without the handicap of ocean freight charges and high German tariffs. Germans were brought to Detroit to learn the techniques of specialized production of components and of straight-line assembly. What they saw caused further reorganization, refitting of other key German warplanes. The techniques learned in Detroit were eventually used to construct the dive-bombing Stukas. At a later period, I.G. Farben representatives in this country enabled a stream of German engineers to visit not only one plane plant, but other of military importance, in which they learned a great deal that was eventually used against the United States.
And not just against the United States, against France, Germany, Belgium, Netherlands, Denmark, Norway, Greece, Yugoslavia, Albania, Egypt, against all of Europe. And accidental, well, when you find out that the German cartels that got all this help were also created by Wall Street, then you realize it wasn't accidental at all. It was intentional and highly planned and organized.
Yeah.
Continue, AJ.
Following these observations, which emphasize the accidental nature of the assistance, it has been concluded by such academic writers as Gabriel Kolko, who is not usually a supporter of big business, that it is almost
superfluous.
Yep. To point out that the motives of the American firms bound to contracts with German concerns were not pro-Nazi, whatever else they may have been. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I've seen the arrest warrant.
So, not pro-Nazi, you know. Let's rebuild your entire industry, even though your country has vowed that you will continue World War I again. Okay, so let's get into the details of the Dawes Plan and what it involved and how much massive funding went over to Germany.
Yeah, so the Treaty of Versailles after World War I imposed a heavy reparations burden on defeated Germany. This final burden, a real cause of German discontent that led to acceptance of Hitlerianism, was utilized by the international bankers for their own benefit. The opportunity to float profitable loans for German cartels in the United States was presented by the Dawes Plan and later the Young Plan. Both plans were engineered by these central bankers, who manned the committees for their own
pecuniary
advantages. And although technically the committees were not appointed by the U.S. government, the plans were in fact approved and sponsored by the government.
And then we'll see that the people on these committees are all New York bankers and their friends, and the German cartels on the other side are financed by the same bankers. Okay, so now the Dawes and the Young plans, for those that understand, were plans to help rebuild Germany after the war. And allegedly, American companies saw an opportunity to do this. However, since Wilson, as we already pointed out to you, was a Bolshevik supporter and a Freemason, Woodrow Wilson, who was behind the whole Versailles plan that would punish Germany economically, they set up a stage. By punishing Germany economically and causing an economic collapse, they allowed New York bankers to buy up Germany, pennies on the dollar, loaning them money. What they did is they created German cartels. They loaned the money. The German cartels bought up Germany, and then they financed the German cartels and then gave them all the technology so they could rebuild the war machine. And that way the American bankers out of New York got control of Germany and built it up. But we'll connect some dots at the end of this program to show that they also founded the Nazi Party. That was all part of the plan. And when you look at the absolute strategic design, this is a plan that was thought up beginning in like 1914, 15 and executed over a period of 20 years. you can't say it's accidental because it's not accidental. People think of a plan and stick with it, okay? And that it has one sole purpose. One sole purpose shows it's intentional, okay? Continue, AJ.
Okay. Post-war haggling by financiers and politicians fixed German reparations at an annual fee of 132 billion gold marks. This was about 1/4 of Germany's total 1921 exports. When Germany was unable to make these crushing payments, France and Belgium occupied the Ruhr to take by force what could not be obtained voluntarily. In 1924, the Allies appointed a committee of bankers, headed by American bankers Charles G. Dawes, to develop a program of reparation payments. This resulting Dawes Plan was accordingly to Georgetown University professor of international relations Carroll Quigley, largely a J.P. Morgan production. The Dawes Plan arranged a series of foreign loans totaling $800 million, with their proceeds flowing to Germany. These loans are important for our story because the proceeds, raised for the greater part in the United States from dollar investors, were utilized in the mid-1920s to create and consolidate the gigantic chemical and steel combinations of IG Farben and yeah.
Try it, AJ.
Very Vereinigte Stahlwerk.
Vereinigte Stahlwerk, yeah. So a cartel is a group of businesses that work together as a unit, okay? And you call it a monopoly, a state monopoly. And we already mentioned how Thyssen, a tiny little group, ended up financed by Brown Brothers Harriman, took over this 30% of the steel and coal industry. And you're going to hear, Vereinigte Stahlwerk is Thyssen. Okay, that's the name of his company, and that's the name of the company that was created by financing Brown Brothers Harriman. Sutton's book doesn't mention that. He wasn't aware of that in '76. That's now come out that company is. So you have on one side all the bankers from New York negotiating with IG Farben and Vereinigte Stahlwerk and a subsidiary of General Electric, but they're all created by American bankers. So it's really American bankers talking to other American bankers, one pretending to be Germans operating through German shell companies. Not really shell companies, but in the sense of they were just American hands and German gloves.
Yeah. Okay. These cartels not only helped Hitler to power in 1933, they also produced a bulk of key German war materials used in World War II. Between 1924 and 1931, under the Dawes Plan and the Young Plan, Germany paid out to the Allies about 86 billion marks in reparations. At the same time, Germany borrowed abroad, mainly in the US, about 138 billion marks, thus making a net German payment of only 3 billion marks for reparations. Consequently, the burden of the German monetary reparations to the Allies was actually carried out by foreign subscribers to German bond issued by Wall Street financial houses. At a significant profits for themselves, of course. And let it be noted that these firms were owned by the same financiers who periodically took off their bankers' hats and donned new ones to become statesmen. As statesmen, they formulated the Dawes and Young Plan to solve the problem of reparations. As bankers, they floated the loans, as Carroll Quigley points out. It is worthy of note that this system was set up by the international bankers, and the subsequent lending of other people's money to Germany was very profitable to these bankers. So
as I pointed out, the Versailles Treaty, by imposing this huge debt to be paid, creates the whole system where the bankers can take over Germany. And the bankers end up using the savings of American citizens to pay the war indemnities that were required by the Versailles Treaty. So it's a very neat system, but it's obviously, this is not accidental, this intentional, calculated, and planned.
And so who were these New York international bankers that Sutton asks?
Yeah, let's name them.
In 1924, Dawes planned experts in the United States were banker Charles Dawes and Morgan representative Owen Young, who was the president of General Electric Company. Dawes was chairman of the Allied Committee of Experts in 1924. In 1929, Owen Young became chairman of the Committee of Experts, supported by J.P. Morgan himself, with alternate T.W. Lamont, a Morgan partner, and T.N. Perkins, a banker with Morgan Associates. In other words, U.S. delegation were purely and simply, as Quigley has pointed out, J.P. Morgan delegation, using the authority and the seal of the United States to promote financial plans for their own pecuniary advantage. As a result, as Quigley puts it, the international bankers sat in heaven under the rain of fees and commissions. The German members of the Committee of Experts were equally interesting. In 1924, Hjalmar Schacht was president of the Reichsbank and had taken a prominent role in organizing the work for the Dawes Plan. So did German banker Karl Melchior. One of the 1928 German delegates was A. Vogler of the German steel cartel Stahlwerk Wenningstedt. In brief, the two significant countries involved, the United States and Germany, were represented by the Morgan bankers on one side and Schacht and Vogler on the other, both of whom were key characters in the rise of Hitler's Germany and subsequent German rearmament. Finally, the members and advisors of the Dawes and Young Commissions were not only associated with New York financial houses, but as we shall later see, with directors of firms within the German cartels, which aided Hitler to power.
Yeah, and Volt, you remember, Stahlwerk Vereinigt is Thyssen's steel cartel that came into being because it got $8 billion investment from Brown Brothers Harriman, Skull and Bones Bank. So on one side of the Dawes Plan, you have J.P. Morgan, who's a Freemason, and on the other side, you have Brown Brothers Harriman pretending to be Vereinigt Stahlwerk. They could have held this meeting in a boardroom in New York City because it's the German bankers on both sides, but they're keeping up the appearances to create a completely false narrative. America's helping Germany. That was the narrative. And as the story goes forward, you're going to find out why we stayed out of the war until the very end. And it wasn't only because the German war industry was basically owned by the New York bankers. It's because an agent of the New York bankers was president of the United States. So let's continue.
1928 Young Plan. According to Hitler's financial genie, Hjalmar Horace Greeley Schacht and Nazi industrialist Fritz Thyssen, it was the 1928 Young Plan, the successor of the Dawes Plan, formulated by the Morgan agent Owen D. Young, that brought Hitler to power in 1933. Fritz Thyssen claims that I turned to the National Socialist Party only after I became convinced that the fight against the Young Plan was unavoidable if complete collapse of Germany was to be prevented. The difference between go ahead.
I just want to interject here. This is a complete lie by Thyssen that he joined the party only late when he realized that was the only way to save Germany. Thyssen was involved intimately in the creation of the Nazi Party, and the evidence comes from the testimony of at the Nuremberg trials of a man called Pohl, P-O-H-L. Pohl points out in his testimony, which you can read online at the nuremberg.law.harvard.edu. Just search for the name Thyssen, And you will find out that Poles history tells you a lot about how the Nazi Party gets going. So we've already pointed out that Hitler was a corporal in the First World War. He was a runner for his own unit in the Somme, and the British did him the favor of killing everyone that knew him. So after the war, he's immediately taken to German military intelligence. Why he didn't really show any abilities in that amount, and he's given the task of infiltrating coal and steelworker unions in the Saarland because because German industrialists felt that they would destabilize the industry. So Pohl's testimony at Nuremberg shows that in 1920, that first of all, he says his father was a chief craftsman in the August Thyssen work at Hamburg, Germany. So his father was well known to the Thyssen management. Okay, he goes on after the war. He joins the German. During the First World War, he joins the German Navy, and he serves for 1-2 years before it's dissolved. And then he joins the Navy again in the 20s. And then when he loses his job there, he comes back to the Saarland, and he is invited by a group of his friends who he all knew were workers at August Thyssen's steelwork, to a thing called the League of the Right. Okay, and the League of the Right was the first political organization created as a cover for the future Nazi Party. It goes on to join with the National Socialist Alliance and becomes the National Socialist Party. So here you have Thyssen workers organizing the beginnings of the Nazi Party in 1923. Now, why should that click on your head now, 1923? Remember we told you in 1921, Brown Brothers Harriman the Harriman Bank binds up Brown Brothers Harriman and begins financing Thyssen's takeover of the steel industry. So what's more sensible if you want to take over the steel industry, that also to take over the unions and infiltrate them so that you can control the workforce? And therefore, the Pohl testimony at Nuremberg is extremely strong circumstantial evidence that August Thyssen was lying when he said he only supported the Nazi Party in 1930. The truth is probably more correct. He founded the Nazi Party in 1923, and he was told to do so by Brown Brothers Harriman as a condition of his financing, because they wanted complete economic and political control of Germany. Because you got to remember, the money behind Harriman's are from the American industrialists, and the American industry went through a terrible struggle beginning in the 1870s all the way up until like 1910. Conflicts between industrialists and unions. There were some violent confrontations where dozens of people were shot by security forces of the industrialists. So they knew very well that their biggest problem for profit and control of industrial production were unions and worker unrest. So very cynically, they decided to organize they would decide to organize political parties that would control workers and pretend to be their defenders. Is not something that should surprise us. Harriman himself was a leading figure in the Democratic Party, which did just that. And that they would made a condition on their loan to Thyssen to take over the steel and coal industries. He ended up with about a third of it. A condition to also organize political organization to control the workers as a way of securing their loan is not improbable or unlikely. It's highly rational, and it would be expected. And if that's the case, the decision to found the Nazi Party does not begin in Germany. It begins in the Brown Brothers Harriman Bank in the beginning of the 1920s in downtown Manhattan, right across the street from New York City Hall.
Yeah.
Okay, AJ, continue.
The Young Plan was assertedly a device to occupy Germany with American capital and pledge German real assets for a gigantic mortgage held in the United States. It is noteworthy that German firms with U.S. affiliations evaded the plan by device of temporary foreign ownership. For instance, AEG, German General Electric, affiliated with the General Electric in the US, was sold to a Franco-Belgian holding company and evaded the conditions of the Young Plan. It should be noted in passing that Owen Young was the major financial backer for Franklin D. Roosevelt in the United European venture when FDR, as a budding Wall Street financier, endeavored to take advantage of Germany's 1925 hyperinflation. The United European venture was a vehicle to speculate and to profit upon the imposition of the Dawes Plan. It is clear evidence of private financiers, including Franklin D. Roosevelt, using the power of the state to advance their own interests by manipulating foreign policy.
Now, who ever heard that Franklin D. Roosevelt was a trader in New York City?
Not me.
I never read that in any of my textbooks in school, or that he worked for Dawes and was a good friend of all the New York bankers who built up the Third Reich.
Mm-hmm.
Never heard that in school.
Mm-mm.
Well, I thought Roosevelt didn't want to get in the war because he was a pacifist.
Mm-hmm.
The truth is, he just protecting the investment of his banker friends.
Yep. Okay.
And then when you add to the fact that Roosevelt was one of the biggest enemies of Patton, who wanted to conquer Germany quickly and bring the war to an end, then you have to start asking what was the motivation of Roosevelt in delaying the final victory over Germany.
Yeah.
And I think it's pretty clear what the motivation is. It had nothing to do with patriotism. He was a complete sellout.
Mm-hmm. So Schacht's parallel charge that Owen Young was responsible for the rise of Hitler, while obviously self-serving, is recorded in a U.S. government intelligence report relating interrogation of Dr. Fritz Thyssen in September 1945. The acceptance of the Young Plan and its financial principles increased unemployment more and more until about 1 million were unemployed. People were desperate. Hitler said he would do away with unemployment. The government in power at the time was very bad, and the situation of the people was getting worse. That was the reason of the enormous success of Hitler had in the election. When the last election came, he got about 40%. However, it was Schacht, not Owen Young, who conceived the idea which later became the Bank for International Settlements. The actual details we worked out at a conference presided over by Jackson Reynolds, one of the leading New York bankers. Together with Melvin Traylor of the First National Bank of Chicago, Sir Charles Addis, formerly of the Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation, and various French and German bankers. The BIS was essential under the Young Plan as means to afford a ready instrument for promoting international financial relations. According to his own statements, Schacht also gave Owen Young the idea that later became the post-World War II International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. A bank of this kind will demand financial cooperation between vanquished and victors that will lead to community of interest, which in turn will give rise to mutual confidence and understanding, and thus promote and ensure peace. I can still vividly recall the setting in which the conversation took place. Owen Young was seated in his armchair puffing away at his pipe, his legs outstretched, his keen eyes fixed unswervingly on me. As in my habit when propounding such arguments, I was doing a quite steady quarter deck up and down the room. When I had finished, there was a brief pause. Then his whole face lighted up, and his resolve found utterance in words. Dr. Schacht, you gave me a wonderful idea. I'm going to sell it to the world.
Now, this comes from the testimony of Thyssen, who's financed by Brown Brothers Harriman, but Schacht was also financed by Brown Brothers Harriman, and they're blaming Dawson for bringing Hitler to power when they're the ones that recruited him and funded him. Talk about hypocrisy. But you see how the Young Plan helped Brown Brothers Harriman get their man into power. So it's really collaboration together. And they knew the Young Plan would cause economic problems in Germany, and that would help Hitler get the power. So it was completely orchestrated, two sides of political theater. People, and Brown Brothers Harriman still exists. It has now $6.5 trillion in assets. You know, people say Trump is wealthy, but Trump's worth 3 billion, or maybe he's worth 10 billion. But Brown Brothers Harriman has 6.5 trillion. You know, that's, you know, calculated. That is 650 times more money than Trump. Do you think if the board decisions makes any kind of decision at Brown Brothers Harriman that Trump's not going to jump to it? Of course he is. His father borrowed money from them, okay? And these are people who have shown, we've just shown you the history now, orchestrated the entire rebuilding of Germany, the creation of the Nazi Party, and the deaths of 40 million people so that after the war they could buy up Europe on pennies of the dollar. Do you think these people would have any qualms about starting a civil war in the United States so afterwards they could buy up the whole United States for pennies on a dollar?
Mm-mm. It's going to get good here.
It's getting worse now, so let's peel away the onion, AJ.
Okay. The BIS, the apex of control. This interplay of ideas and cooperation between Helmut Schacht in Germany and through Owen Young and J.P. Morgan interests in New York was not only a facet of a vast and ambitious system of cooperation and an international alliance for the world control, as described by Carroll Quigley. The system was nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system in each country and the economy of the world as a whole. This feudal system worked in the 1920s as it works today. To the medium of the private central bankers in each country who control the national money supply of individual economies. In the 1920s and 30s, the New York Federal Reserve System, the Bank of England, the Reichsbank in Germany, the Banque de France also more or less influenced the political apparatus of the respective countries indirectly through control of the money supply and creation of the monetary environment. More direct influence was realized by supplying political funds to and or withdrawing support from politicians and political parties. In the United States, for example, President Herbert Hoover blamed his 1932 defeat on withdrawal of support by Wall Street and switched of Wall Street finance influence to Franklin D. Roosevelt.
Surprise, surprise.
Politicians amenable to the objectives of financial capitalism and academies prolific with ideas for world control, useful for the international bankers, are kept in line with a system of rewards and penalties. In the early 1930s, the guiding vehicle for this international system of financial and political control, called by Quigley the apex of the system, was the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, the BIS apex.
Now, I want to point out that so when AJ is saying in the text BIS, he's referring to the Bank of International Settlements. This was a very nefarious organization. I just saw, I think last week, a video shared on Twitter by someone who was trying to justify what Hitler did during the war. And it pointed out a fact that you've never taught in your history books, that when Hitler's armies went around Europe, one of the first things they did was rob the national banks of the countries that took over. And what were they looking for? Gold bullion. They robbed billions of dollars in gold. So I don't know how many billions it was. It was more than 8 billion. And when they robbed the gold, did they take it to the Reichsbank in Berlin?
No.
No. Guess in which bank they deposited the gold?
Switzerland?
Bank of International Settlements. all the gold Hitler stole in the war was given to the J.P. Morgan Brown Brothers Harriman venture, the Bank of International Settlements. So Hitler knew who was financing him and whose debt he had to pay.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, in 1942, Brown Brothers Harriman was found guilty by the U.S. government under Roosevelt for having traded in $8 billion in Nazi gold. But though it was recommended that the Brown Brothers Harriman's assets be seized by the U.S. government for violating the War Act for trading with a belligerent power, nothing was ever done to Brown Brothers Harriman, which shows you that the Roosevelt Group, the Dawson Group, the Morgan Group, and the Brown Brothers Harriman were all working together, just all actors in the same plan.
Yeah. So it continued its work during World War II as medium through which the bankers, who apparently were not at war with each other, continued a mutually beneficial exchanges of ideas, information, and planning for the post-war world. As one writer has observed, war made no difference to the international bankers. The fact that the bank possessed a truly international staff did, of course, present a highly anomalous situation in a time of war. An American president was transacting the daily business of the bank through a French general manager, who had a German assistant general manager, while the secretary general was an Italian subject. Other nationals occupied other posts. These men were, of course, in daily personal contact with each other, except for Mr. McCricket. Theft were, of course, situated. See okay. He's talking about, it talked about some sort of infra theft, were of course situated permanently in Switzerland during this period, and were not supposed to be subject to orders of their government at any time. However, the directors of the bank remained, of course, in their respective countries. They had no direct contact with the personnel of the bank. It is alleged, however, that H. Schott, president of the Reichsbank, kept a personal representative in Basel during most of this time.
Well, here I'll have to point out that Sutton gets it backward. The governments weren't controlling the Bank of International Settlement. The Bank of International Settlement was controlling the governments. And the fact that all these bankers got along is because they're the ones that orchestrated the whole war. The war was just theater to them. The murder of 20 million men was just theater to help them make money. And these are the people running the world. These bankers haven't ceased to exist and now even more wealthy than they were back then. I mean, Brown Brothers Harriman in 42 was caught trading in $8 billion worth of German gold. Now they have 6.5 trillion, that's $6,500 billion. So these people haven't gotten any poorer after the war. They succeeded tremendously in this ruse to sell hundreds of millions of people to death for the sake of their profit.
Yeah.
And this is why these same banks today are behind the COVID scam. They want to kill billions of people because they see that there's profit in it.
Yep.
And this is why Trump, whose family was always like this with Brown Brothers Harriman, is pushing the vaccine. Mm-hmm. He's not going to make America great again. He's out to make America more property of Brown Brothers Harriman. That's what he's out to. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty obvious. People don't change. He hasn't made any sign that he's going to change on that score.
Mm-hmm. It was such secret meetings more secret than any ever held by Royal Arch Masons or by any Rosicrucian order, between the central bankers at the apex of control that so intrigued contemporary journalists, although they only rarely and briefly penetrated behind a mask of secrecy.
Yeah, well, now after 100 years, the mask is pretty much ripped off. We can't really name everyone involved, but in all this money being loaned by Brown Brothers Harriman to the German, to Vereinigte Stahlwerk in Germany, which is an iron steel company, Prescott Bush, whose father ran a steel company in Ohio, had to have been completely involved because they would have needed technical expertise in their bank on the loans. And so that means the Bush family is intimately involved in the creation of the Nazi Party, the engineering of the Second World War, and in the entire the robbery of all the banks of Europe of their bullion, and the political control of the whole war by Roosevelt and everything thereafter. And we'll show you that people on these committees were even in control of the Eisenhower administration and the Kennedy administration.
Yeah.
It just has not stopped.
Now we're getting into the building of the German cartels. A practical example of international finance operating behind the scenes to build and manipulate politico-economic systems is found in the German cartel system. The three largest loans handled by the Wall Street international bankers for German borrowers in the 1920s under the Dawes Plan were for the benefit of three German cartels, which a few years later aided Hitler and the Nazis to power. American financiers were directly represented on the board of these three German cartels. The American assistance to German cartels had been described by James Martin as follows. These loans for reconstruction became a vehicle for arrangement that did more to promote World War II than to establish peace after World War I. The three dominant cartels, the amount borrowed in the Wall Street floating syndicate were as follows. So the German cartel, the German General Electric Company, the Wall Street Syndicate, National City Corporation out of Cleveland, Ohio, now currently owned by PNC Financial Services. The amount they issued for insurance, $35 million.
So that was their insurance coverage. And next company?
Vereinte Stahlwerk, or United Steelworks by Thyssen. Dillon, Read and Company.
Mm-hmm. And then the third largest loan?
That was $70,225,000 million.
Mm-hmm.
Then
oh yeah, and then the third loan?
American Chemical Farben, again National City Corporation, another $30 million.
It's interesting how protected these companies are, because if you go to the National City Corporation's Wikipedia article, it says it was founded in 1824, and yet this history then begins in 1973, as if it didn't do anything between 1824 and 1973. So I just couldn't let that lack go, and I just edited the article like anyone can do in Wikipedia, and I put this little quote in how they loaned all this money to German companies that rebuilt Germany and supported Hitler, because that's an important fact and it shouldn't be left out of Wikipedia. But Wikipedia is heavily controlled by Israeli intelligence agents. Why would they want to hide this information? I wonder. I don't know. Interesting. Continue, AJ.
Looking at all the loans issued, it appears only a handful of New York financial houses handled German reparation financing. The three houses, Dillon, Read and Co., Harris, Forbes and Company, and the National City Company, issued almost 3/4 of the total face amount of loans and reaped most of the profits. So the Wall Street Syndicate manager, Dillon, Read and Co., participation in German industrial issues in U.S. capital market. The number is $241 million. The profits on German loans only $2.7 million, and the percent total is 29.2%.
What was the next highest company to loan money?
National City Company, $173 million. And they made a profit of $5 million at the height of 20%.
They had a pretty good turn. Who was the third largest?
Harris, Forbes and Company, $186 million, and they got in profit 1.4 million at 22.6%.
Notice the Forbes name, that is another Skull and Bones family.
Yeah.
Next.
Let's see here. Spire and Company, 59 million. They only got 0.6 million in profits.
Continue
And
and finish the list, yeah.
let's see here. Lee Higginson and Company, 53 million. They don't list how much they made.
Mm-hmm.
Guarantee Company of New York City, 41 million. They only made 0.2 million. Kuhn Loeb and Company, 37 million. Only made 0.2 million. Equitable Trust Company, 34 million. Only made 0.3 million.
Now you notice the primary banks got all the profit. So it was a game they organized for their own benefit, and then they got a bunch of smaller companies involved as suckers to finish out the capital. And that's usually how these schemes work. So we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars, which in the 30 would be like hundreds of billions of dollars today. This was a complete rebuilding of the German basic industries, without which Germany would have never been able to start the Second World War. So this is more than just accidental. Okay, this is intentional. Bankers don't loan $200 million for an accident.
Yeah.
And they make sure the loans can be repaid.
And total amount is $826 million.
Mm-hmm. Now I'm going to show you how absolutely disastrous and damaging to the U.S. government this was. So they loaned 0.8 billion US dollars to rebuild Germany, and Germany goes and starts the Second World War. You know how much debt the U.S. had to go into just to fight the Second World War, the U.S. government? Do you know how much debt, AJ, off the top of your head? Do you ever hear the number? More than $50 billion, the U.S. federal debt. So they loaned in New York $1 billion to cause a war that caused our government alone $50 billion. It's kind of the debt of all the other nations. You see how absolutely destructive and dangerous renegade bankers are, and how these people have never been brought to trial. These banks and corporations were never punished. They never suffered any penalty, even though it is now known what they did. And do you think that the Democrat or Republican Party would ever penalize them? Well,
No.
how could it, since all the presidents since 1960 at least, well, since Eisenhower, all the Republicans have been Brown Brothers Harriman's picks, Skull and Bones men. And the Democratic Party is completely controlled also by the same bankers out of New York. That's why Hillary's from New York, supported. People were saying, why is Hillary running as senator in New York? She'll never win. She's not from New York.
Yeah.
And yet she wins by a landslide because she is from New York, because the bankers from New York have always been behind her. Trump's from New York. We were told the Bushes are from Texas. No, they're not. They're from New York. New York bankers. So we've been lied to. Lied to. Roosevelt's Secretary of War, Skull and Bones man. Eisenhower's Secretary of Commerce, Skull and Bones man. Even Kennedy, as Secretary of Treasury, was a Skull and Bones man. So we're not saying that recently the Masons have took over the U.S. government, or that only Trump is an agent of Brown Brothers Harriman. That's not the facts here are quite contrary. These bankers have been controlling the presidency for at least 100 years, not more than 100 years. And it's always so that they can get more control and more profit, and regardless of how many people they kill one another. So don't think it's a contradiction to say Soros is a friend of Trump, even though he's funding Black Lives Matter. It's all part of the same game.
Yeah. Now, that it goes on after the mid-1920s, the two major German combines of IG Farben and Wernick Stahlwerk dominated the chemical and steel cartel system created by these loans. Although these firms had a voting majority in these cartels for only 2 or 3 basic products, they were able, through control of these basics, to enforce their will throughout the cartel. IG Farben was the main producer of basic chemicals used by other combines, making chemicals so its economic power position cannot be measured only by its capacity to produce a few basic chemicals. Similarly, Wernick Stahlwerk, with a pig iron capacity greater than that of all other German iron and steel producers, combined was able to exercise far more influence in the semi-finished iron and steel products cartels than its capacity for pig iron production suggests. Even so, the percentage output of these cartels for all products were significant. So, Phoenix Stahlwerk products, pig iron, pipes, tubes, heavy plates. Percent of German total production in 1938. So pig iron, 50.8%. Pipes and tubes, 45.5%. Heavy plates, 36%. Explosives, 35%. Coal tar, 33.3%. Bar steel, 37.1%. IG Farben, synthetic methanol, 100% of total production in Germany in 1937. Magnesium, 100%. Chemical nitrogen, 70%. Explosives, 60%. Synthetic gasoline, high octane, 46%, 1945. Brown coal, 20%.
You know, we hear about all the problems with the shortage of gasoline in the 70s and 80s. I never knew synthetic gasoline existed. Have you ever heard of it?
No.
It was invented in the United States and it was given to Nazi Germany. But we never used it ourselves. Synthetic gasoline, imagine that. This is how zealous they are about financing their projects, giving technologies that aren't even used in the United States that we invented. It's absolutely devious.
Yeah.
It's absolutely black in the moral sense.
Among the products that brought IG Farben and Wernick Stahlwerk into mutual collaboration were coal tar, chemicals, nitrogen, both of prime importance for the manufacture of explosives. IG Farben had a cartel position that assured dominance in manufacture and sale of chemical nitrogen, but only 1% of the caulking capacity of Germany. Hence, an agreement was made under which Farben Explosives subsidiaries obtained the benzol, toluol, and other primary coal tar products on terms dictated by Wernick Stahlwerk, while Wernick Stahlwerk explosive subsidiary was dependent for its nitrates on terms set by Farben. Under this system of mutual collaboration and interdependence, the two cartels, IG Farben and Wernick Stahlwerk, produced 95% of German explosives in 1957 and 58. Hold on, that's a typo.
Yeah, 37 and 38.
Yeah. On the eve of World War II, this production was from capacity built by American loans and to some extent American technology.
That's pretty damning evidence on complete, intentional, planned, and programmed reconstruction of a war machine for the purpose of supporting Adolf Hitler and even creating him and giving him all the power. The sign that Hitler knew who controlled him and the bankers knew that they controlled him was that when the war breaks out, Thyssen says, I'm not in favor of the war, and he flees to Switzerland, and then the Swiss give him up. Switzerland's supposed to be neutral, they're not supposed to give anyone up, and Thyssen gets put in a concentration camp, and he's treated quite well the entire war. And who takes over Thyssen's company? The Wehrmacht take it over. Hitler becomes the head of the company. So the banker, and did the bankers object to that? No, there was not a word objection out of the United States about that. So they knew who they were financing. It wasn't Thyssen, it was Hitler. That was the intention from the beginning.
Yeah.
It's pretty clear.
Now, IG Farben and Standard Oil cooperation for production of synthetic oil from coal gave IG Farben cartel a monopoly of German gasoline production during World War II. Just under one half of German high-octane gasoline in 1945 was produced directly by IG Farben, and most of the balance by its affiliated companies. In brief, in synthetic gasoline explosives, two of the very basic elements of modern warfare, the control of German World War II output was in the hands of two German combines, created by Wall Street loans under the Dawes Plan. Moreover, American assistance to Nazi war effort extended into other areas. The two largest tank producers in Hitler's Germany were Opel, a wholly owned subsidiary of General Motors, controlled by the J.P. Morgan firm, and the Ford AG subsidiary of the Ford Motor Company of Detroit. Nazi granted tax-exempt status to Opel in 1936 to enable General Motors to expand its production facilities. General Motors obligingly reinvested the resulting profits into German industry. Henry Ford was decorated by the Nazis for his services to Nazism. Alcoa and Dow Chemical worked closely with Nazi industry with numerous transfers of their domestic U.S. technology. Bendix Aviation, in which J.P. Morgan controlled General Motors firm, had a major stock interest, supplied Siemens and Halsik AG in Germany with data on automatic pilots and aircraft instruments as late as 1940, and then the unofficial war. Bendix Aviation supplied complete technical data to Robert Bosch for aircraft and diesel engine starters and received royalty payments in return. In brief, American companies associated with the Morgan Rockefeller International Investment Bankers, not, if it should be noted, the vast bulk of independent American industrials, were intimately related to the growth of Nazi industry. It is important to note that we develop our story that General Motors, Ford, General Electric, DuPont, the handful of U.S. companies intimately involved with the development of Nazi Germany were except for the Ford Motor Company, controlled by the Wall Street elite, the J.P. Morgan firm, the Rockefeller Chase Bank, to a lesser extent, the Warburg Manhattan Bank.
Okay, he doesn't mention the Brown Brothers Harriman Bank, and that's one thing that's missing in his research, but they're the ones probably loaning the other banks money. So I want to point out this one thing. This shows you how absolutely dishonest these companies were. Not only they wanted to keep U.S. out of the war, but they insisted to the Allied High Command not bomb these factories that they had invested their money in. And on top of that, when companies like General Motors in the Second World War starts building tanks for the U.S. military, they build one of the worst tanks that ever served. They were called tin cans because the German artillery pieces would go right into them and kill all the American soldiers in it. But their subsidiaries in Germany built some of the best tanks in the Second World War. The Tiger tank and the Panzer tank were absolutely invincible, almost impossible to destroy. So why would they give our men inferior equipment, but give Nazis superior equipment if it was just accidental?
Yeah.
Because that would serve protecting their investment.
Yep.
And that's how evil J.P. Morgan, who is Freemason, Rockefeller, who's Skull and Bones, which are Freemasons, and Brown Brothers Harriman. That's how evil these banks are. They are absolutely evil institutions. They are the enemies of humanity, these groups.
And he finishes out. It is an indictment of the apex, those firms controlled through the handful of financial houses, the Federal Reserve Bank system, the Bank for International Settlements, their continuing international cooperative arrangements, and cartels which attempt to control the course of world politics and economics.
So there you have it. Who's really responsible for the Second World War and who has never been brought to trial at Nuremberg, and who needs to be. And it's not just Republicans, it's also Democrats, but it's not Republicans or Democrats. They're both hands of the same Masonic system of bankers out of New York. And if you think by voting one, you're going to save yourself from the hands of the bankers in New York, you're totally delusional. You've been just totally hoodwinked because you've been too lazy to read American history. We're not inventing things. We're just reading books that have already been published. Open your eyes and read some books before you go to the polls this November. Don't listen to these idiots in Catholic media saying, you're going to commit a sin if you vote B rather than A. Well, you're going to commit a more sin if you don't read Sutton's book on Wall Street bankers, or you don't see our videos on the ties between them, all these people. I mean, that would be as ridiculous. Do we say you're going to commit mortal sin if you don't read these things? No, we don't say that because we're not presumptuous jackasses like these people are, who are just serving the Masonic order. AJ, you had a conversation with one today. It was basically, what did he want? He wanted crumbs from Trump.
Yep. I saw his tweet saying, well, let me read the tweet to you. Yeah. Let me read this tweet to you. Okay. It says, God is saving America through the person of POTUS, President Donald Trump. The heart and soul, hands and feet, the mind of Donald Trump prove his complete dedication to restoring America's greatness as one nation under God. We need to be constantly reminded not just on our currency in God we trust. And I replied, what a blasphemous thing to say. If he was truly doing so, abortion mills would be destroyed. Abortion is outlawed, all things contrary to Christianity outlawed, Christian principles restored. We Christians are and this is his response. We Christians are responsible for restoring Christian principles in society. We want POTUS to do that for us? What blasphemous is to continue allowing USCC to fund CCHD to funds to BLM, Jesuit, LGBTQ agenda, CRS, contraception, education, etc. And then I replied, at least under the Catholic Party of America administration, we will cut all government funding off to the USCCB and allow in Christian refugees, which Trump has stopped. And you responded to this guy, this person, you want Trump to give you crumbs. We want to take back everything for Christ. This is the difference between your Christianity and ours. And his final reply, first you have to eliminate the deep church and its minions, starting with Bergoglio, is Judas. Then America, dissolve USCCB. Don't just cut the funding. Meanwhile, Biden will commit us to new world oppression for the next 8 years. Our united will with the divine will of God wins.
So he basically said, don't found a Christian party, remove Bergoglio. Then solve the funding issue. Then follow the Christian problem. He's basically saying, don't doing what you suggest. Don't solve the problem at the root. Start trimming the leaves of the weed. This guy is a member of the deep church because he wants you to give your loyalty to Masonic parties. And he says that that's holier. You know, it's like you have this weed growing in your backyard. Instead of digging it up, you start plucking a leaf off now and then. I mean, is that sanity? This guy's a complete fraud. And he's totally reverted. He's totally inverted. So instead of doing what's necessary, he wants you to do something that's not necessary. And he says doing what's not necessary is actually holiness and the will of God. But doing what is necessary is, well, you shouldn't even consider that as presumptuous. It's not in the right order of things. He has this whole order upside down. This guy must be a Freemason. Otherwise, he's so drunk on Kool-Aid, he's lost his mind. He's not even thinking straight anymore. And this is your standard. He's not a talking head. He's just a Twitter account, but he doesn't even use his real name, so he could be a government operative or a Skull and Bones operative. But this is your standard logic of your talking head. Vote Trump. Vote Trump. Christian Party America. Silence. And any Catholic who is silent at the proposal of a party that will take America back for Jesus Christ is not a Christian. He's a Freemason, either because he's joined the lodge or he has accepted their principles as governing his mind. There's just no other way about it.
Yep. So I even shared with him our 3 red pill videos.
I don't think he'll even listen to him because he has chosen his religion and it's not of God. Yep. And what he names as God is not the being we call God, and his Christianity is not our Christianity at all. His is anti-Christianity because his whole moral order is upside down. And does that finish chapter 1, AJ? We were going to do the 3 chapters, but after I took a look at first chapter, I go, AJ, this is a whole program in itself, and we highly recommend Sutton's book, Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler, because in it you can see that we're still under control of these people. They're still playing us the game. They're still supporting both sides. And no matter what side you win, they're going to end up with more control unless you break free of this false duality that they create and join the Christian Party of America, support a Christian party in your own country, because they're doing this to all the countries. They're not just doing it in America now. 6.5 trillion is enough to control all the countries on the world. Lukashenko said they were going to give him $1 billion if he buckled down with COVID-19 scam. Well, you know, there's only 256 countries in the world, so if you only need 256 billion to buy up all the countries' governments in the world, well, they have 6,500 billion, so they could buy all the governments in the world 5 times over. No, not 5 times over, 24 times over. So don't think they're not controlling what's going on, and you'd be foolish not to. We need a Christian Party of America because against evil this deep and this powerful, only the forces of Christ can prevail. And if you think anything else can, you're delusional.
Yep. So let me give them the link for the Christian Party.
Christian Party for America.wordpress.com, and for is spelled F-O-R. Christian Party for America.wordpress.com. We're getting strong responses from people who are not controlled, people who are not already drinking the Kool-Aid of one of these false apostles on the internet. We are both cradle Catholics. We did not ever leave the practice of our faith. We practice our faith our whole life long, and we accept the whole teaching of the church. We're not like Michael Voris, who lived 20, 30 years in sodomy, Frank Walker, who admits he never practiced his faith until recent years, Taylor Marshall, who was an Anglican. Then as soon as he was ordained a priest, he flipped and became Catholic, and now he's telling everyone how to live the Catholic faith. Anne Barnhart was a Protestant converted, I don't know how many years ago, maybe 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago. Skojek, who never did anything to promote the faith until he went to DC and got an interview in the Wall Street Journal, an absolute nobody on the Wall Street Journal, you imagine that. And then all of a sudden he gets hundreds of thousands of dollars given to his apostolate. I could go on and on. Weston, who left the Catholic faith as a teenager because he disagreed with church teaching. Most teenagers don't even think about church teaching, and he became an atheist and then got involved in child psychology, and then, and it's all his family and relatives, he admits, all atheist ultra liberals, and then converted to the Catholic faith and organized LifeSite Media and organized a political alliance among all these Catholic apostles to hold the line, be for Bergoglio, and who's an admitted Freemason. So these people, they're not cradle Catholics that were always faithful to the faith, and they're controlling now most Catholics' minds in the United States who are conservatives. And you're not going to be able to practice your faith unless you start listening to Catholic media. Your first question is, are you a cradle Catholic and you've always practiced the faith? If the person can't say yes to both those questions, change the channel, okay? And I'm not saying only listen to us. There are other groups out there. But there are a lot of left-wingers out there. I mean, we talked about the Crusader option some weeks ago, and Anthony Steiner was very kind to feature the thing on his his blog talk show. But everyone responding in his comments, he got 600 comments, which is amazing, were all left-wing socialists claiming to be Catholics. And there is a group of neo-Nazis, and they all seem to gather around a certain Catholic, I won't mention his Twitter name, out of Idaho, and they seem also intent on infiltrating Catholics. So there's a lot of groups out there that are just false. They're not real, faithful, authentic Catholic. If you're a faithful, authentic Catholic, you're for Christ, you're not for Mussolini, you're not for Adolf Hitler, you're not for General Franco, you're not for any Stalin, Mao, any other dictator, Chavez, what's the dictator in Cuba? I forget his name right now. You're not for any of those people. Castro, you're for Jesus Christ. You're not for Donald Trump, and you're not for Roosevelt, and you're not for Obama, and you're not for Hillary. You're for Jesus Christ. And if you don't understand that, you haven't begun to think about your faith or be an adult Catholic, okay? You've let yourself be stunted intellectually, and you've given the loyalty of your mind over to the world and to some false figure. So snap back into your Catholic faith, start thinking as a Catholic, start believing as a Catholic, and give your loyalty only to Christ, and chart around all these false apostles that are just out. And I won't even mention they're all out there to make money for themselves. Yeah, well, because what I think it was St. Alphonsus said, the sign of heresy is that they practice Christianity for the sake of profit, not for saving souls. And our apostolate, neither AJ and I get a salary. All the money that is raised by Ordo Militaris Radio TV, which I don't even think amounts to $350 in 4 months, goes to equipment, and it doesn't go to our salaries, because we're not here to make money. We're here to tell you the truth, to save your soul, and to defend your rights, because that's the purpose of Ordo Militaris Catholicus, is to defend your rights when you're being attacked. So if you appreciate this kind of sincerity, honesty, and integrity, I encourage you to support Ordo Militaris Radio TV with a free will subscription, one time or recurring, and it will help us get better equipment and build a studio, because right now we don't have a studio. It might look like AJ's in a studio, but he's actually just sitting at the desk in his living room with an electronic background, and he doesn't have an income. He's homebound, and I don't have an income. We do this for the love of God. So if you find it helpful, please support this apostolate so we can bring the truth to more Catholics and break through the narrative control of so many disillusioned, or I should say deluding false lay apostles out there, that they might say a lot of good things, but they're not telling you what's really going on.
So stay tuned in the coming days. We'll get to you chapter 2, maybe chapter 3, in the same book, Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler. It's $14 on Amazon, or free download. Please get it. Use it for homeschooling. Get all of Sutton's works. They're amazing.
Yeah, these are the kind of books you need on your bookshelf if you're going to be a free American and keep your family free. Thank you, AJ, for having me on this program. It was a real honor to talk about what really went on in the 20s. And you heard it here on Ordo Militaris Radio TV. Ask yourself, what other Catholic apostolate has dared open this topic?
Yep. So this is Ordo Militaris Radio TV signing off. Deus Vult.
Deus Vult.